The truth would never be revealed, they maintained. But everything is different tonight. The gospel community has been hearing rumors for months. Many were too scared to speak out loud about the rumors. Bishop J. Drew has now finally spoken out, confirming what many had thought about Bishop Hogan in a way that has shocked the whole religious community. This was no silent admission. This was no small clue. Pastors, choirs, and congregations were all halted in their tracks by this event. You'll see why this story is upending the fundamentals of loyalty, leadership, and trust like never before after you hear what Bishop J. Drew finally acknowledged. Something has been simmering beneath the surface if you've been in the vicinity of the gospel community in recent weeks. Gossip, stress, inexplicable quiet, and an increasing feeling that a big thing was going to happen. The whole scene has changed now that Bishop J. Drew has come forth and confirmed what so many people had been speculating about Bishop Hogan. In this video, we go into great detail about what actually occurred, why it matters, and how this revelation has fundamentally altered how people view church leadership, accountability, and inner workings that are rarely seen by the general public. Some of the information that have quietly come to light will surprise you, and it gets more startling the closer you listen. For this is not merely a tale of two bishops, it is a tale about power, influence, trust, and the unspoken costs that leaders bear long before the general public learns the truth. And believe me, you'll understand why this moment is more significant than anyone anticipated once we discuss the chronology of events, the private discussions, and what ultimately led Bishop J. Drew to speak up. Prior to delving into all of that, however, we must return to the starting point. Something odd had been going on in the background before Bishop J. Drew's startling announcement. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if there had been a change in the air that only the most perceptive eyes could detect. Bishop Hogan's acquaintances started acting strangely. Some queries were evaded by longtime supporters. Normally outspoken leaders suddenly became hesitant and used uncommon caution while speaking. Nothing was triggered by a single major event. It was the accumulation of hints that were subtle. Members of the choir mentioned unjustified meeting cancellations, while remaining silent in private. Pastors who had previously lauded Bishop Hogan started to distance themselves in public. You could sense the strain even in virtual environments. Posts were removed, threads appeared, and comments were inexplicably disabled. There was something going on, but nobody wanted to express it aloud. Silence frequently speaks louder than any lecture in church groups. Furthermore, this quiet was deafening. Bishop J. Drew's close associates also began to observe a change in him at this time. He seemed more circumspect than usual, thoughtful, and cautious. People questioned whether he was struggling with the weight of disclosing something that may alter everything, or if he knew something. Because Bishop J. Drew doesn't talk on the spur of the moment, he speaks because he has come to a realization that the truth can no longer be kept a secret, especially when it comes to something this serious. And most people sensed it, even though they didn't know the details yet. There was going to be a big revelation concerning Bishop Hogan. Whether the truth would be revealed was not the question. Who would have the courage to say it first, and when? The pivotal moment did not occur during a broadcast service, on a stage, or in a pulpit. Rather, it started at a private meeting that few people were even aware was taking on behind closed doors. Several church leaders had assembled, anticipating a standard discussion on future activities and partnerships. However, the mood in that room conveyed a different message. Normally lively and expressive pastors sat rigidly, their gaze suggesting something considerably more serious than schedule choices. Those with knowledge of the situation said Bishop J. The atmosphere instantly changed as Drew entered the room with a serious demeanor. People weren't used to seeing a leader who was calm and confident like this. His face conveyed the weight of someone who had spent more time grappling with a reality than he had ever anticipated, and there was silence in the room when he eventually spoke. He didn't start with charges. He wasn't dramatic to begin with. Rather, his tone was calm and methodical, causing each syllable to be delivered with force. He responded to the gossip about Bishop Hogan. For months, there had been rumors that had been quietly going around, rumors that many people thought were just inflated rumors. When Bishop J. Drew stated, "There are things that need to be addressed, things that can no longer stay buried," however, everyone realized that things were much more complicated than that. The responses came right away. A few leaders recoiled in shock. Others lowered their heads, already sensing the seriousness of what was going to happen, as though suddenly aware that the story they had been attempting to keep to themselves was going to become uncontrollable. A number of them exchanged fast, anxious looks. The passion of Bishop J. Drew's speech was what gave this moment even more impact. This man had no intention of causing controversy. This person was obviously under pressure to expose something that would impact not only a colleague bishop, but the entire religious community that was associated with him. However, he was also aware that keeping quiet would only exacerbate the situation. Then came the unexpected part. Bishop J. Drew affirmed that there was more to the reports about Bishop Hogan than idolatry. They weren't unfounded rumors or misreported tales. They had their roots in actual occurrences, actual discussions, and actual issues that leaders had been battling in private for far too long. Everything changed the instant those words were uttered. As they tried to comprehend what this meant, several leaders muttered prayers to themselves. Others posed queries in the hopes of gaining insight, but they are terrified of the responses, because there is no turning back once a revered bishop comes forth and admits that the rumors are true. The whole story changes. The entire leadership structure is shaken, and the entire community observes. Bishop J. Drew's subsequent remarks did more than only validate the gossip. No one outside the room had ever heard the deeper layers before, but it revealed them. Time seemed to stop for a second, according to those who witnessed it. Some claimed that they could almost feel the temperature change, the icy silence that only arises when a truth that is too burdensome for one person is finally voiced out loud. Bishop J. Drew clarified that the worries about Bishop Hogan were not new. For a long time, they had been developing covertly, weaved through private accounts, private discussions, and behavioral patterns that had been observed but never publicly disclosed. Leaders had been caught between preserving the church's reputation and safeguarding those who were starting to share their stories for months or even years. He didn't speak louder. He didn't embellish. He spoke in a steady, controlled tone, but there was a certain anguish that only arises when a leader feels accountable for the facts he has to tell. Those in the room reported that Bishop J. Drew clarified that a number of people had privately sought him to voice their concerns with Bishop Hogan's behavior. Some spoke of instances in which limits were crossed. Others brought up choices that were not disclosed to the leadership, which caused misunderstanding and mistrust among people who were meant to be his colleagues. Others alluded to a more profound trend, something that implied this was a part of a bigger, more intricate story rather than a one-time problem. Later, one of the meeting's pastors characterized it as the instant everyone understood that the whispers weren't unrelated, rather, they were connected. Many were taken aback by the revelation of how long Bishop J. Drew had been dealing with this personally. He said that he had hoped the matter would be resolved without a public altercation. He hoped someone else would take charge of dealing with the problem, or that Bishop Hogan would come forward. However, when the situation worsened and more people came forward in silence, that silence could no longer be maintained. The bit that rocked the room was then revealed by Bishop J. Drew. A recorded private chat had just come to light. He disclosed. Bishop Hogan had a talk that was impossible to misunderstand. It wasn't rumors. No one's word was used against another. It was an indisputable piece of evidence that supported all the theories that leaders had been circling. Reactions started as soon as he brought up the recording. Stunned, some leaders leaned forward. Some people clung to the edges of their chairs. Some were so overcome by the weight of it that they covered their mouths in shock. This was no longer merely a rumor. The type of documented affirmation that changes public opinion, influences leadership choices, and compels a community to face a reality they never wanted to face was this one. However, Bishop J. Drew was not done yet. The recording, he disclosed, had not been intended for him. At first, it wasn't forwarded to church authorities. It was from a person who had been profoundly impacted. someone who had witnessed the events unfold in quiet and had finally had enough, and that individual thought it was important to hear the truth. For the sake of accountability, healing, and transparency, not for retaliation or attention. The question that hung in the room now was straightforward yet horrifying. What follows? Because everything changes when there is proof, when a reputable bishop affirms it, and when the leaders in the room realize that the truth cannot be disregarded. The instant Bishop J, although it wasn't initially apparent to the public, the ripple effect started as soon as Drew verified the rumors. Whispers became urgent discussions within leadership circles. They sent emails. Meetings were planned, phone calls were placed, and the revelation's weight hovered over everyone like an unsaid storm cloud. Leaders who had been undecided were compelled to choose a side. Some discreetly cut ties with Bishop Hogan out of concern about being linked to trouble. Others stepped up their efforts to shield him, claiming that loyalty necessitated prudence and patience. Even the most devoted followers, however, were unable to deny the fundamental reality. Bishop J. The silent rumblings were now undeniable after Drew saw something and verified it. The strain was already beginning to be felt in the neighborhood beyond the room. Always sensitive to change, social media started to buzz. Clueless signals and subliminal clues began to circulate even before the formal announcement. People shared tidbits of rumors, conjectured, and asked what was actually going on. It was an ideal setting for generating interest, apprehension, and discussion. Not merely the revelation itself was the most startling aspect for many. It was realizing how long it had been going on without anyone raising their voice in public. Under this new light, families, churchgoers, and ministry volunteers started reflecting on past actions and choices that suddenly made sense. Projects were delayed, invitations were turned down, and transfers were mysterious. They were all pieces of a puzzle that, up until now, few people had figured out. Following the meeting, Bishop J. Drew was also the target of intensive scrutiny. Others condemned him for coming forward, saying that such discoveries could harm the church or cause division in the community, while others applauded him for his bravery. However, Bishop J. Drew recognized and clarified that disregarding the truth would ultimately cause far greater harm. The backlash grew personal behind the scenes. Friendships of a long period were strained. Previously normal conversations became strained and wary. Some leaders doubted their own judgment, wondering how they could have failed to see the telltale symptoms of betrayal, battling the thought that someone they looked up to had engaged in behavior that went against their own beliefs. Nevertheless, there were times of clarity within the stress. Some churchgoers reported experiencing an odd feeling of relief that the truth had finally come to light, relief that action could now be made to address it, and relief that the quiet had been broken. It served as a reminder that, even though disclosures can be upsetting, genuine accountability and development always require openness and honesty. However, a new twist that no one had foreseen appeared just as it appeared that the storm may pass. A select group of leaders received a late-night message that alluded to even more complex information that would make matters worse. Although the details of that message are still private, insiders said it included information that might completely alter the story. Once more, a reminder that the first revelation is rarely the last in circumstances such as these. Now, chilling was the question everyone was thinking about. What else remained a secret? Following Bishop J., the inevitable question loomed as Drew confirmed the whispers behind closed doors. How and when would the general public be made aware of this fact? Soon, rumors started to circulate. Cautiously at first, then more conspicuous. Changes in announcements, messages, and the conduct of church leaders were noticed by church members, ministry volunteers, and even casual observers. It was now hard to ignore the tension that had been subtly growing for months. When the news eventually made it to social media, the response was swift and furious. Posts mentioning Bishop J. Drew's confirmation started to circulate. Some were encouraging, praising his bravery for speaking up and shedding light on a long-ignored issue. Others were critical, accusing him of causing needless drama or violating trust. Naturally, speculation was rampant. People were attempting to piece together what was known and what was unknown. Bishop J. Drew's unquestionable clarity, in addition to the confirmation itself, was what gave this event its immense force. Rumors have been scattered whispers, subject to interpretation, for months. In effect, this is real, said a reputable voice from within the leadership circle. It is impossible to deny that this occurred.